Well, not just that. It's just, take off what's off the table, what's on the table, and they've recommended or further consideration to some, for us, a little bit radical stuff like taxing capital income, but they're not messing with GST, which I think personally is a good thing. I think our GST base, despite the regressivity arguments, is a very important part of our tax system that we shouldn't mess with because it's efficient, and regression can be addressed through other means.
Could be cut.
Yeah. Well, it could be cut, that's right. But they also haven't recommended adjusting marginal tax rates, which is, if you don't adjust the rates and you don't do much to the base, you haven't really got much scope to do much.
There was a politically driven tax working group designed to come up with a result that wasn't too radical. Under MMP, it's very difficult to do any sort of significant shifts. You become very incremental in the way that you think of things. Yeah. And unfortunately, the way our voting population is structured, it means that older property owners dominate younger renters who vote at much lower rates.
Yes, you've issued a call to arms. I saw your call to arms.
Yes, and I agree. I saw that too, and I agree.
Get to the ballot box, said Bernard Hickey. Look, a couple of quick things before we go. In the news this afternoon, Bernard, an addendum to the sad saga of Fonterra's involvement with Being Mate in China. In a video to celebrate the partnership in 2015, the founder of Being Mate was quoted as saying the company had a retail network of over 80,000 outlets. But what he said was, Being Mate knows well the sales data from 80,000 outlets, and online commenters are being very scathing. It's getting the headline. Is it that much of a story? I mean, I suppose the question is why someone at Fonterra, knowing Being Mate didn't have 80,000 outlets, didn't correct the impression. But in fact, does it have much substance?
Yes, it's a $500 million substance story for Fonterra shareholders, and it's the main reason why they're thinking about breaking up and selling off Fonterra.
But Teo Spearing's never represented Being Mate as having 80,000 outlets.
He may not have, but certainly he promoted Being Mate as a crucial element in Fonterra's China strategy. Unfortunately, he and Fonterra didn't do enough due diligence. It's very hard to do it in China, but Fonterra, for example, didn't have a Mandarin-speaking director on the board of Being Mate from the start, and they actually completely missed the boat on the big shift in infant formula being sold through e-commerce, i.e. Alibaba, into China when this was a play through bricks and mortar outlets. And unfortunately, Fonterra was pushed into this deal in part by the Chinese government. They were rushed into it because after the botulism scare way back in 2011, 12 or whenever it was, the Chinese government said, you better invest heavily in the farms and you better find yourself a partner to distribute. Otherwise, there's a risk we'll kick you out of China completely. And Fonterra did what they thought was sensible, which was quickly find a partner to distribute into China. And unfortunately, they didn't do enough due diligence and they were duped. This isn't unusual, to be frank, for overseas companies doing joint ventures in China. They often get misled. Their assets are often, frankly, stolen. And at the end of the day, the IP is transferred and they don't get access to the markets. I mean, it's an openly obvious practice the Chinese government and its companies have, which is to prefer Chinese and to grow China as an economy, not other countries.
But apart from that, it was a great deal. Thank you. Bernard Hickey on the panel.
So it was good that we ended on my area of expertise completely.
Penny Ashton, lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Peter Vile, you too. Thanks for your company today. And thanks, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and Checkpoint is on the way.
No mai, haere mai, o te hotake, o te ahi ahi. This is Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. Coming up tonight, primary school teachers and principals reject the latest pay offer. Will there be more strikes? NZEI President Linda Stewart joins us. Donald Trump draws laughter at the UN General Assembly, but not from Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who continues to capture the attention of the world's media in New York. A Napier landlord is overwhelmed after getting 900 inquiries in just 24 hours. An Auckland strawberry grower forks out more than $20,000 for metal detectors. Comedian Bill Cosby spends his first night behind bars. This is after being sentenced to at least 3 years in prison for indecent assault. And a man is discharged without conviction after stealing 2 toes from the Body World exhibition in Auckland.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A National MP says the acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, called the Deputy Police Commissioner, Wally Haumaha, to reassure him after an inquiry into his appointment was launched. The inquiry was sparked by comments Mr Haumaha made in 2004, defending police officers accused of raping Louise Nicholas in the 1990s. Chris Bishop made the allegation under parliamentary privilege in the House this afternoon.
Today, sir, I can also reveal that Winston Peters rang Wally Haumaha after the inquiry into his appointment was announced. He gave him assurances, or words to that effect, that things would be okay.
Chris Bishop says the call was deeply inappropriate, but has not said where the information came from. Primary school teachers and principals will vote on industrial action next month after rejecting the Education Ministry's latest pay offer. Their union, the NZEI, says options include a 2-day national strike and working to rule. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The union says its members have resoundingly rejected the ministry's offer of 3 successive pay rises of 3% a year. It says the money is not enough and the offer fails to deliver small classes, better working conditions and more help for children with special needs. The ministry says it's disappointed by the vote. The deadlocked pay talks have already triggered one strike. 70% of teachers and 84% of principals refused to work for a day last month. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Napier families desperate for housing are applying for flat shares or small units because they can't find anywhere else to live. One landlord says he was astounded to get more than 900 inquiries for a 1-bedroom unit in Tamatea within 24 hours of it being listed online.
It was just a 1-bedroom and we put not suitable for family or children. That we had families wanting to rent it and they were quite willing to say, oh, the kids can sleep in the bedroom, we'll sleep in the lounge and that. Some people were desperate. A couple of them were actually had tears in their eyes when they were talking to us.
A Napier landlord, Dee Penno of the rental agency Hawke's Bay Properties, says she'll often field 200 to 300 inquiries for every home she lists, and competition is so intense that people will even offer to pay more rent. MPs have unanimously agreed to block any increase in their salaries over the next year. Legislation enacting the pay freeze, announced last month, passed into law this afternoon. MPs had been in line for a 3% rise, but the Prime Minister said that was unacceptable. The government will now review the way the Remuneration Authority calculates future pay movements. Agreement has almost been reached on the first stage of a major overhaul of the country's rescue helicopter services. The Ministry of Health and ACC are close to signing off a 3-year contract for the Northland and Auckland regions. Sarah Robson has more.
The Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust and the Northland Emergency Services Trust put forward a joint bid to continue chopper flights in the area. The 24/7 service would use the existing bases in Whangarei, Auckland and Whitianga with upgraded aircraft. It's hoped the formal contract will be signed at the end of next month, allowing the new service to be up and running before the end of March. Negotiations are continuing for rescue helicopter services throughout the rest of the country. Ko Sarah Robson, Aho.
Auckland Transport is looking at cutting the speed limit on all central city roads to 30 kilometres an hour in a bid to reduce an alarming rise in the number of deaths and injuries. A spokesperson, Andrew Allen, says the restriction would have a negligible impact on travel times but create a far safer environment for pedestrians and cyclists.
We're talking in the order of 18 people a year, either being killed or seriously injured in our CBD. That's 1.5 people a month. And I, for one, would be very happy to pay the price of a 2 to 3 minute journey time impact.
Andrew Allen of Auckland Transport. It's 5:04. To sport, the credibility of the National Rugby League has been called into question in the lead up to the season-ending grand final between the Melbourne Storm and the Sydney Roosters. The NRL's judiciary acquitted Storm fullback Billy Slater of shoulder-charging a Cronulla player last week and cleared him to play this weekend, even though video footage clearly shows he made no effort to use his arms in the tackle. Roosters captain Boyd Cordner concedes the shoulder charge rules are confusing. While pleased that Slater, who's retiring after Sunday's game, will be able to have a farewell match, Cordner says his action was undoubtedly a shoulder charge, and he's now puzzled about what the rules actually are. Manchester United manager Jose Mourinho denies there's a rift between himself and midfielder Paul Pogba, despite the French footballer being stripped of the vice-captaincy at the club. United were eliminated from the League Cup on penalties by second-tier Derby County today after Mourinho had rested Pogba and several other players for the match. He's refusing to say why he's taken the vice-captaincy away from the World Cup winner. United weren't the only Premier League team to fall to lower league opposition. All Whites' Chris Wood's Burnley went down 2-1 to third-tier Burton. Manchester City eased into the fourth round by beating third-tier Oxford 3-0. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the world of generation identity. The latest far-right movement to come out of Austria. And John Bishop on his travels to Colorado. Did he sample the merchandise or just inhale it?
Murray TV has been working on something called Project Refresh, and this is part of it.
Yes, they're reported as having a strategic refresh. You say Project Refresh. It's the first time I've ever heard that term.
Yeah.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight. Tomorrow, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, but the odd shower from afternoon. For the remainder of the North Island, long fine spells and a few showers. Nelson, Marlborough, Westland and northern Fiordland, mainly fine, a few showers possible inland. Buller, scattered showers becoming confined to inland areas tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, mainly fine, a chance of a shower for Banks Peninsula and Dunedin. Clutha, Southland and southern Fiordland, occasional showers becoming confined to the coast tomorrow night. And the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail, easing tomorrow morning. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Another teachers' strike could be on the cards after teachers rejected the second pay offer from the Ministry of Education. The Ministry offered a 3% increase on salaries each year for the next 3 years, but NZEI Te Reo says that's not nearly enough, and the offer doesn't address important issues such as working conditions as well as class sizes. NZEI President Linda Stewart says the offer doesn't address the teacher shortage, and members will meet this weekend to consider their options, including further strike action.
Our members have really characterised it by giving a resounding no to it, with their rejection of it, very clear rejection of the offer. So what are our messages from our members? That actually it's not really addressing the concerns around the growing teacher shortage. It's not addressing the concerns that they have around ensuring that they've got the time to teach and that our principals have the time to lead in our schools.
Now, if you can paint that picture a bit more specifically for us and for our listeners, because there's a sense out there that teachers have a similar working day to a student and similar holidays, and with a teacher shortage and with the pressures that they're facing at the moment, as well as workplace conditions, here's a chance for you to really paint the picture of what teachers are facing. Can you give us that picture?
So the reality for our people is that they do not work the same hours as their children. And if that was the case, then I think we'd probably have people lining up to be teachers. The reality for our teachers and our principals is that they work really, really long hours, that they are spending a lot of their time on huge workload issues. So lots of time with the planning and the preparation around providing an individualised type of program for the children in their classrooms, that for many of them they have children in their classrooms who require significant resources and are just not getting those resources to help them with their learning. And that creates an extra strain on our teachers. But also, we just don't have enough teachers. So at the moment, we're hearing the stories up and down this country of teachers who are going to school when they're sick because they know that they can't get, or their principals can't get relievers for the classroom. the principals in many cases, or the assistant principals or deputy principals, or our specialist classroom teachers are having to go into those classrooms instead of the teacher if the teacher, if the teacher is just too sick to be there, and that means that their work doesn't get done. And that's the reality up and down this country.
OK, now we're just going to break them down to a few issues here. One, of course, is pay. 3% has been promised for someone who's entering the profession. I think that takes them, my notes here, $48,000 a year up to $53,500 a year. But that's only in 2 years' time. What sort of message do you think that sends to people considering teaching as a profession?
Well, for many of those people who are considering teaching or have considered teaching as a profession, they can actually go and get jobs elsewhere that are going to pay significant amounts more than that, and with less stress. I've had people who've been working in my own school who have made decisions to move outside teaching because they can have more time to spend with their own families in the weekends, in the evenings. Then that becomes far more desirable for them. So they can get more money, 2, they can have more time. But what I really do want to stress is that this is not just about pay. It is absolutely about also the workload that people are experiencing. So it's about people knowing that the job that they really want to do as teachers, which is to make a difference in children's lives, is what they're absolutely going to be able to do. And that's what people are saying up and down this country. And so this is totally up to our membership. Our membership have been very clear, they're very resolute, they're very determined around this, and it will be up to them what action we take.
But you will strike until you get what you want. That seems to be the message coming out today.
So doesn't necessarily have to be a strike. There are a couple of other things that are being suggested, but it will be up to the membership to have that conversation.
Linda Stewart there from NZEI at 12.5 minutes past 5. Donald Trump's assertion that his administration has achieved more than any other in history prompted chuckles at the UN General Assembly. But Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, was not among those laughing. She did, however, dismiss the US President's speech, in which he also talked tough on Iran, saying its leaders sowed chaos, death and destruction, as nothing new. The speech after the two leaders met in person last night at Mr Trump's reception for world leaders in Midtown Manhattan. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell filed this report from New York.
Donald Trump arrived late to the UN to give his speech, and when he finally got there, his address got off to an odd start.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
It's not clear whether UN delegates were laughing at or with Donald Trump, but he won't be happy about much of the coverage, saying he got laughed at on the world stage. Mr Trump railed against globalism in his speech and continued his increasingly inward focus.
America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
And as predicted, the US president lashed out at Iran.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations. Instead, Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond.
Jacinda Ardern sat expressionless in the General Assembly hall with other world leaders, later saying she was just listening carefully to what Mr Trump was saying.
You'd have to ask some of the people that responded. I wouldn't want to try and characterise anyone else's response. I didn't laugh. I was listening to the words being spoken by the President.
Jacinda Ardern says she heard nothing new in Mr Trump's statements.
There wasn't anything in President Trump's statements today that surprised me. He obviously takes a very particular view on issues around sovereignty, multilateralism, and of course issues around Iran. I don't think that would have surprised anyone today.
She did get to have a chat with Mr Trump last night at the US President's annual reception, though she admits there was a slight incident with a flag.
So the way that the reception works, everyone pulls into a room and then there's an opportunity where, well, an expectation that everyone files through for a photo as part of the reception. So I took that opportunity to have that brief conversation during that moment. Clark took the opportunity to knock down a flag, which was rather unfortunate.
Which flag?
I didn't notice which flag, but of course, I don't know, he's just got wide elbows, I think.
First Lady Melania Trump told Clark Gayford not to worry about knocking the flag, saying it was okay. Jacinda Ardern will give her address to the UN on Friday morning, New Zealand time. In New York for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
Also on the Prime Minister's busy New York agenda today was a key media interview with CNN's Christiane Amanpour. The pair covered a range of topics like climate change, parenting and New Zealand's high level of domestic violence. The Prime Minister spoke about trying to normalise working mothers and then defended New Zealand against allegations of incredible sexism in this country.
I don't know whether you're as alarmed as I've been amazed by some of the incredible sexism that you've received from your own media at home about this issue. Oh, can a mother be Prime Minister? Can a pregnant woman do the job? Can a new mother actually talk about climate and refugees and trade and all the things that you're talking about?
We should be open to criticism, we should be open to be challenged in the same way all of our counterparts are, and I accept that and I encourage it. It means that we have a robust democracy, but it becomes very tricky if you ever try and partition off what might be seen as sexist criticism, and so to be honest, I just don't engage. I think the best way I can rebel against those notions is just being a competent leader and being good at my job.
And it is actually extraordinary that these thoughts and these kinds of views occur in New Zealand, which is distinguished by being the first country in the world that gave women the right to vote.
And yet I would absolutely classify us as being incredibly progressive. The fact that I am the third female Prime Minister. I never ever grew up as a young woman believing that my gender would stand in the way of me being able to do anything that I wanted, and I credit New Zealand for that. I credit the environment, I credit those women who went before me. And, you know, to credit New Zealanders as well for the fact that they did welcome the fact that I had a child in office. The positivity far outweighed any negativity. And so I'm deeply proud of where we are as a nation.
That was the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern talking to CNN's Christiane Amanpour at 18 minutes past 5. Napier's rental squeeze has got so tight that one landlord has pulled an ad for a rental home after being overwhelmed by more than 900 inquiries in a 24-hour period. Many, he says, were from families who were so desperate for a place to live that they didn't care it was only a one-bedroom unit. Other landlords in the city say competition for rentals is so intense they'll often get hundreds of calls from prospective tenants, many of them begging or even crying to see a property first before it gets snapped up. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley.
A few weeks ago, this landlord, who didn't want to be identified, put up an ad for a one-bedroom unit in Napier for $285 a week.
Well, within 10 minutes of putting it up in Trade Me, we were getting hit with lots of queries. And the worst thing I did was put my cell phone number on, and then I was just getting flooded with texts too.
And within 24 hours...
we pulled it because we had 946 or 43 replies.
What did you think when you got that many?
I honestly couldn't believe there was that much people, needing a place or wanting a place. And considering it was just a one-bedroom, and we put not suitable for family or children, So there is a big desperate demand out there in the respect that we had families wanting to rent it, and they were quite willing to say, oh, the kids can sleep in the bedroom, we'll sleep in the lounge and that. And then we posted an open day where people could come in and look in that, and you could tell some people were desperate. A couple of them actually had tears in their eyes when they were talking to us.
Getting 900 plus responses is pretty extreme, but other Napier landlords say it's not unusual to get at least a couple of hundred inquiries. This Napier man, looking for 2 flatmates to share his ahuriri home, says many applicants are so desperate they don't even mention they have a family.
I got probably about 10 or 15 calls a day on a Trade Me ad and about 7 or 8 texts, and that's probably every day for about 2 months. We're just getting all types of people just desperate to move in as quick as they can. Like, I've had 3 or 4 different people who I was going to sign up, and then they would say, I won't be there to sign the paperwork, but my husband will be there with our kids. And they led me to believe that the room was just for the one person.
Dee Penno, a director at the property manager Hawke's Bay Properties, isn't surprised. She's currently advertising a 1-bedroom flat in the Napier suburb of Maraenui for $260 a week and has already had more than 200 inquiries.
There's just absolute desperation out there. You know, you get all these applicants that apply, and, you know, how do you pick? Which desperate person do you pick, you know?
I've heard of stories where tenants, you know, they're so desperate to get into a place they'll even offer more than the place it's advertised for. Have you come across anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. And I've also have people that ring up desperation with wanting to see the house. You know, literally 2 minutes after I've listed it, they're ringing up going, can I see it before anyone else sees it? You know, begging down the phone.
And Dee Penno predicts it will only get worse, with many landlords having sold their properties to take advantage of the buoyant housing market and stricter requirements for rental properties coming into force.
You know, with these new laws, I mean, I agree with the insulation, totally, but I think it is scaring a lot of landlords off about what is going to be coming up, and I think we'll see a lot of mum and dad investors with one rental property that just go, this is too hard, and they're out.
Linda Otter from the Salvation Army in Napier says it's so difficult to find a rental that some people are staying in its transitional housing for more than a year when they're only supposed to be there for 3 months.
We help people to view, look up online and find some places to get viewing appointments for, and we'll support them to those viewings if necessary. But there are so many people that do attend those viewings, and landlords are able to basically pick who they'll have in there, I guess.
Trade Me figures show Hawke's Bay rents have risen the fastest in the country, jumping 14% in the last year to a record high of $480 in August. Meanwhile, the number of government grants to pay for emergency motel accommodation in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne has tripled in the June quarter compared to March. The Ministry of Social Development says that's because more people are coming to them for help, just as it asks them to, and it usually sees an increase over the winter months. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And Anusha has filed a number of reports from Napier about this housing. It's been referred to as a crisis, and people there in desperation in that report. We want to put those numbers in perspective, particularly the first one that featured 900 expressions of interest in a 24-hour period. That's 1.5% of Napier's population applying to rent that single house in that one day. If you've got a similar rental story either in Napier or elsewhere in the country, we'd love to hear from you. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're also on Facebook. It's just Checkpoint on Facebook, and you can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We'd love to hear from you. It's just coming up to 24 minutes past 5. The man once dubbed America's dad and one of the biggest names in television is behind bars tonight. The comedian Bill Cosby has been sentenced to between 3 and 10 years in prison for aggravated indecent assault. The 81-year-old was found guilty of drugging and molesting Andrea Constand in 2004, but a string of other women have accused him of sexual assault. CNN's Jean Cazares was in court for the sentencing.
Mr. Cosby, any comments, sir? In a dramatic scene, Bill Cosby leaves a Pennsylvania courtroom in handcuffs. Once America's dad, now prisoner. Judge Stephen O'Neill sentencing the disgraced comedian 3 to 10 years in state prison.
For decades, the defendant has been able to hide his true self and hide his crimes using his fame and fortune. He's hidden behind a character created, Dr. Cliff Huxtable. It was a seminal character on TV, and so was the family, but it was fiction.
Cosby has been under house arrest since April after being convicted of drugging and sexually assaulting Andrea Constand back in 2004. Today, Constand and her family watching from the first row of a packed courtroom. In her victim impact statement, she saying, quote, "Bill Cosby took my beautiful, healthy young spirit and crushed it. He robbed me of my health and vitality, my open nature, and my trust in myself and others." Judge Stephen O'Neill telling her, "The jury heard your words. I heard your words." Then speaking directly at Cosby, "Mr. Cosby, this has all circled back to you. The day has come. The time has come." He also said no one is above the law. Other women who say Cosby also attacked them watching from the gallery, embracing Constand after the sentence was read. Tamara Green was one of the first women to come forward after Constand.
But today's the day that we've been waiting for. Today's the day when I got to witness the fact that Bill Cosby was rendered helpless by being taken out of a courtroom by policemen.
Cosby declining to address the court, but after court, his publicist defending him and likening him to Jesus.
Cosby's doing great, and Mr. Cosby knows that God is watching over him. He knows that these are lies. They persecuted Jesus, and look what happened. Not saying Mr. Cosby is Jesus, but we know what this country has done to black men for centuries. This has been the most racist and sexist trial in the history of the United States.
Cosby's lawyers saying they will appeal, but tonight he is spending his first night in prison.
At almost 27 minutes past 5, we're going to go to a different sort of court case now. A judge has slammed the police for overcharging a man who took 2 human toes from an exhibition in Auckland. You might remember there's the Body Worlds exhibition and actually featured parts of real human bodies. It was quite controversial itself, and it got opinions from both sides there about whether it was ethical or not. Joshua Williams appeared for sentencing in the Wellington District Court on one charge of stealing 2 toes and another of interfering with a human body. However, asking those present to excuse the pun, Judge Bill Hastings said the 28-year-old had been totally overcharged. Anne-Marie May was in court.
In May, Joshua Williams attended the Body World exhibition in Auckland. It consisted of human corpses which had been plastinated and set into various poses. Mr. Williams went to a display of an acrobatic couple with the woman being lifted, which was not shielded by any glass or other barrier. He said he reached out to touch the female body's toes, they flicked back and he pocketed the index and middle toes and left. Mr. Williams later posted a picture to Instagram with a caption saying he had attended the exhibition and stole a toe from an uncovered display, lol. His lawyer, Amelia Jeffers, told the court while her client faced serious charges, she wished to distinguish his offending from other more offensive cases.
The bodies were donated voluntarily and in full knowledge of the kind of procedure that was going to occur. They were handled extensively, and whilst this doesn't excuse Mr. Williams' actions at all, it might minimise the type of offence that was inherent in his actions.
Ms. Jeffers said her client was remorseful and would happily complete community work. However, in the end that was not necessary, as Judge Bill Hastings said in a previous case, the Supreme Court had ruled a dead body did not constitute property, which meant the toes taken by Mr. Williams could not legally be deemed to be stolen. He also said if the plastination process had left little that was human in the items displayed, then Mr. Williams had not really improperly interfered with a dead body.
It could certainly be argued that the improper interference with a dead body took place well before they arrived in New Zealand, when they were turned into plastic objects and put on display for a paying audience. What you did pales in comparison.
The judge asked the police prosecutor, Sergeant Mike Stonia, to decide which charge he wanted to proceed with, and he elected to go with interfering with a dead body, meaning the theft charge was dismissed. Judge Hastings said he was concerned about how a conviction for interfering with a dead human body would look on Mr. Williams' record.
It conjures up an image of a cloth-hatted grave robber with a shovel digging up graves in a cemetery at night. What you actually did was pluck 2 toes from a plastinated body, already posed and intended to be the object of visitors' attention.
The judge said the stigma a conviction for interfering with a dead human body would attract would be out of all proportion to the gravity of what Joshua Williams had actually done. He discharged him without conviction, telling the police Mr. Williams should have actually been charged with intentional damage. The toes have been returned to the police and refastened to the exhibition body. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
It's 5:30. Coming up on Checkpoint, an Auckland grower spends more than $20,000 installing metal detectors at his farm ahead of his strawberry harvest. Victoria University says it didn't evict a woman the day after she attempted to take her own life. We'll have more on that. And Auckland Transport considers dropping the speed limit in the inner city to 30 kilometres an hour. You might have a point of view on that. Get in touch. We love your feedback. 2101 is the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook as well as email. checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But first, Katrina Batten with the news headlines.
The acting Prime Minister Winston Peters has yet to respond to claims by National's Chris Bishop that he made a wildly inappropriate phone call to Deputy Police Commissioner Wally Homaha. Mr Homaha's appointment is currently under investigation over comments he made in 2004, defending police officers accused of rape in the 1990s. Chris Bishop says Mr Peters called Mr Homaha to tell him things would be okay after the government inquiry was launched. Mr Bishop made the allegations under parliamentary privilege but has not explained where the information came from. The Primary School Teachers Union says they'll vote on industrial action next month after rejecting the Education Ministry's latest pay offer. The NZEI says options include teachers going on strike for 2 days or working to rule. Their members have overwhelmingly rejected the ministry offer of three pay rises of 3% a year. The union says the money is inadequate and they want smaller classes, better working conditions and more help for children with special needs. Napier landlords have been astonished by the number of families so desperate for housing they're applying to share flats or rent small units. One has had more than 900 inquiries for a 1-bedroom unit within 24 hours. And a rental agent says homes get up to 300 inquiries and the competition is so intense people will beg to be the first to see a property and offer more to pay more rent. Air New Zealand is increasing ticket prices on some routes this week because of rising fuel prices. The corporate travel agent FCM has announced the airline is pushing up prices on flexi fares and last-minute bookings by 4 to 8% on some routes from Friday. Air New Zealand CEO Chris Luxon says New Zealanders are aware of rising fuel prices. And MPs have all agreed to a pay freeze with legislation that was passed into law this afternoon. MPs had been in line for a 3% rise, but the Prime Minister said that was unacceptable and the new law blocks this year's increase. The government is now going to review how future pay movements are worked out by the Remuneration Authority. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much, Katrina. We'll see you then. Nona Peltier is here for the business news.
Hello.
Good evening. Air New Zealand tonight, they've told shareholders at the meeting in Christchurch today the airline is facing headwinds. What kind of headwinds?
Well, you know, we've just heard that passenger tickets are going to be going up, not just domestically, but internationally too. For example, the Australian flights are going to $10 extra seat, no matter where it is, at the front or at the back of the aircraft. So that's not going to be a big surprise, I guess, to not just to Air New Zealand shareholders, but anyone who goes to the pumps. I mean, you know, crude oil prices are at a 4-year high, and they're going to stay there for a while, despite the efforts of Donald Trump to drive those prices down. The Russians and the OPEC nations are not that all interested in upping production, so don't expect prices to come down. And it's the old double whammy. Our dollar is also weaker. And it wasn't really helped that much by a more upbeat business confidence survey that we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah. So the fuel prices. I mean, what was the reaction there at the meeting? Did you get any of that from the?
No, it wasn't raised at the meeting. So I guess the shareholders weren't aware that their tickets were going to be going up. Those were sort of separate issues that came together by coincidence this afternoon.
Okay, so business confidence, it's rebounded, but workers are less confident, according to a key survey out today. What are they? They're afraid of losing their jobs.
Yeah, well, that's right, and that is exactly so. Not only that, they're not convinced they're going to get wage increases, and which is interesting because we've had an increase in the minimum wage, yet workers are not very encouraged. Now, that's also reflected in the business confidence survey that's out today. The retail sector is more downbeat, while overall the survey was upbeat a bit. The retail sector was more downbeat. And, you know, I don't want to be overly pessimistic because a rebound is a rebound. And we saw in the confidence survey, business confidence survey, we saw the numbers improve a reasonable amount. You know, a net 38% of firms expect business conditions to deteriorate over the next year. And that's an improvement of 12 points over the last survey. So, yes, 38% are expecting a deterioration, but it's not as bad as it was. Now, is that good? I don't know. It depends on whether you're one of those half full glass or half empty glass people.
And there wasn't any more detail in that survey as to why are people so unsure?
Well, look, it does follow the government's announcement of that business council, you know, that's led by coincidence, Air New Zealand's chief executive, Christopher Luxon. Okay, maybe that helped a bit, not sure. But, you know, overall, the number of firms expecting to reduce their investment in their own business and hiring intentions and so on. So investment in things that they would, you know, actually fell as well. So overall, though, the number expecting better times for their own businesses rose 4 points to a net 8%. These are still very low numbers. They don't indicate that the economy is, you know, steaming along. On the other hand, doesn't indicate that the wheels have fallen off the economy either.
Okay, you're having a bit each way. What about those markets today?
A bit each way, I'd say, for sure. Okay, so overall, though, you know, our market was, you know, rose just about 4 points to 9,350, and that confidence survey, even though it wasn't like wow, did show a little bit of a tick up after that. We went to from 66.5 cents to 66.7 US cents just a few minutes ago there at 91.7 Australian and 50.6 pence. So interesting day, and we're going to have the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to come out with their note on rate hikes tomorrow morning, and we'll also hear from the Reserve Bank where no change is expected.
Okay, we'll get the latest on that then. Thank you very much, Nana
You're welcome.
Peltier, for the business update. It's 37 past 5. An Auckland strawberry grower has forked out more than $20,000 to install metal detectors at his farm after needle-ridden strawberries were found in New Zealand. On Sunday, 3 needles were found in one punnet of Western Australian strawberries at an Auckland supermarket in St Luke's. Australia's strawberry contamination crisis comes just as growers here are about to put their fruit on the market. So what are New Zealand growers doing in response? Our reporter Katie Scotcher and cameraman Dan Cook went out for a look.
The Zarberry Strawberry Farm is just 20 minutes north of Auckland City. A large silver tin shed sits at the entrance, that's the pack house, and 29 fields lined with rows of strawberry plants surround it. The farm's owner, Bowman, who goes by one name, has run the place for 9 years. He's in countdown mode. In 2 weeks, 150 of his workers will start the harvest.
We picked this in the early hours of the morning, so ideally we try to have all our fields picked before day of the hit, midday, 1 o'clock. And they'll be picked here and scanned and sent to the pack house where it'll be packed and QC'd.
But there's a lot to do before then. On Sunday, news broke that 3 needles had been found in a punnet of strawberries sourced from Western Australia, brought at an Auckland countdown. It's still unclear where the needles came from. Police in Australia have been investigating more than 100 reports of contaminated fruit, many of which are believed to be hoaxes and copycat incidents. and every Australian strawberry now has to pass through a metal detector before it can be exported. The same regulations haven't been imposed on the 150 New Zealand growers, but Bowman isn't taking any risks.
So we've invested on metal detectors, which will be installed here before our season starts. And everything that is picked and packed will be examined. And additionally to that, we'll be adding additional surveillance cameras to capture everything that goes in and out of our cool stores, then onto the truck.
Despite spending more than $20,000 on the new security measures, Bowman is certain the strawberry sabotage crisis won't happen here.
Some may think that, okay, it's over the top, but I think it is better to be ready to ensure that our industry is not put into a chaos like what's happened in Australia.
It's a crucial time for strawberry growers. The harvest season has already started for some, and it's about to start for others. The Australian industry, worth about 130 million Australian dollars annually, was hit at the start of its season. The scare prompted product recalls and forced growers to destroy their crops. Bowman says if the situation here reaches the same level, the $35 million New Zealand industry will be hit hard.
It'll have a significant impact on our financial ability going forward, and not just for us, and I think right across from the growers mainly. Retailers will be affected, and there will be many employees. We've got people here whose whole family relies on them, who's employed with us.
Bowman says there are serious consequences for tampering with food in New Zealand. The maximum penalty for contaminating food is 10 years imprisonment. I tamaki makoto mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott-Ruaho.
19 minutes to 6. We can bring up to date now with some breaking news. Winston Peters has issued a statement. Now, of course, this is in relation to the proceedings in Parliament today. The National MP Chris Bishop used parliamentary privilege to allege that Winston Peters had called Wally Homaha, who's obviously under investigation. And after that investigation was launched, Mr Bishop alleges under parliamentary privilege that the acting Prime Minister at the moment, still Winston Peters, called Wally Homaha to assure him things would be okay. That's the quote from Chris Bishop in Parliament. He also said he gave him assurances, this is Chris Bishop speaking, or words to that effect that things would be okay. And he described that alleged move as deeply and wildly inappropriate. We have put calls through to Mr Peters' office. Those that offer to speak on the program still stands. We have received a statement just now, hot off the press, from Winston Peters' office, and he calls it baseless nonsense. I will read out parts of it to you. Mr Peters says Chris Bishop hasn't made a revelation, as he claimed, and, quote, I'm swatting off this midge right now. Mr Peters clearly unhappy with what's going on. He says, my office has checked all my phone records. Since the inquiry was announced, no such call was made. It's a matter of public record. This inquiry was initiated in my capacity as acting Prime Minister. The public can have faith in the inquiry. It was initiated by a cabinet. It's been conducted by a highly respected independent QC, Mr Peters says, and it will report back to cabinet. The terms of reference have been publicly released. The final report will be made public. Regardless, any suggestion that New Zealand First Ministers are seeking to unduly influence this inquiry is baseless nonsense. So that's Winston Peters' response to Chris Bishop. We've also put calls through to Chris Bishop to see whether he will speak to us as well. So we will hopefully have more on those allegations for you before the end of Checkpoint tonight. It's coming up to 5:45. Stead Nuku was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months in jail for burglary and breaching release conditions. But now, 4 years later, the 26-year-old faces a sentence without end. He's committed his third strike offence following a string of violent attacks on prison officers as well as fellow inmates. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Stead Nuku's father was a gang member and he's followed in his father's footsteps. His childhood was violent and he left school early. And now, at just 26 years old, Nuku has nearly 70 criminal convictions. Today, Nuku stood in the dock at the High Court in Auckland, where Justice Downs sentenced him to preventive detention and the maximum term for injuring with intent to injure, 7 years in prison. This means he'll only be eligible for parole when he's proved he's no longer a threat to the community. But it's while he's been inside prison that Nuku has committed his worst offending. Justice Downs said it was at the maximum security prison Paremeremo that Nuku committed his first strike offence in 2015. He and another prisoner attacked an inmate in an exercise yard.
You had ordered your co-offender to break the victim's arm. When he failed, you intervened. As the victim was lying on the ground, you kicked him. You then wrenched his arm in an arm lock, causing it to break.
Nuku tried unsuccessfully to break the prisoner's legs and other arm. For that attack, he was sentenced to 5 years and 9 months in prison. The following year, Nuku committed his second strike offence.
You and other prisoners acted in concert to assault prison officers with sharpened implements. The offending was premeditated. Some of the officers suffered significant injuries.
The charges added a further 3 years and 10 months to Nuku's sentence. Just over a year later, Nuku hid a makeshift weapon under a piece of cloth and approached another prisoner from behind.
You used this to strike the victim to the head. You attempted to do so again several times. A fight ensued. Another prisoner joined in.
The attack only ended after prison officers broke it up. Nuku later told authorities the victim had claimed he had stolen his CD player. Less than a month later, Nuku, again armed with a shank, approached another prisoner from behind.
You stabbed the victim with it repeatedly. While you did so, another prisoner punched and kicked the victim. You stabbed the victim not fewer than 12 times.
This time the fight was over stolen biscuits. The victim was left with wounds to his back and head. Nuku's lawyer, Anushka Bloom, said her client understood the previous strike warnings, but they had had little effect. However, she said Nuku could be rehabilitated and had shown a willingness to take part in anti-violence counselling inside prison.
That is somewhat of a contradiction, given that he is someone that is really requires to do these particular programs due to his offending, due to the long-standing issues that he does have. But he is, up until now, currently prevented really from engaging with a number of courses and rehabilitative options that would assist him.
She said there was also a paradox in that preventive detention was designed to protect the public, but Nuku posed a bigger threat to prisoners and guards inside jail. Justice Downs said he had reports from a psychiatrist and psychologist who found Nuku posed a high risk of reoffending. Psychologist Michelle Cotonou found Nuku was carefree about staying in prison.
You told Ms. Cotonou you liked committing assaults in prison as you felt you had achieved something by hurting a rival gang member. You said in prison it is a case of either him or me.
Nuku also idealises lifers, prisoners serving life sentences, and had wanted to be one since he was aged 18. But Justice Downs said Nuku also wanted to get out of prison for the sake of his mother. In sentencing, the judge said Nuku posed a risk to people whether he was inside prison or on the outside.
That you are prepared to repeatedly stab someone because they took your biscuits does not bode well for your interactions with others in the outside world, particularly given the pressures and pitfalls of modern life.
He acknowledged prison could be an incubator for violence and that prison was what Nuku wanted, but said he posed a high risk to the community and had little inclination to change.
Preventive detention is the only sentence that may persuade you to take responsibility for your actions and in turn encourage reform.
Nuku had a grin on his face during most of the sentencing hearing. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gaiaho.
It's 12 minutes to 6. Victoria University has spoken publicly for the first time, refuting claims it evicted a woman from the halls of residence the day after she attempted to take her own life. Yesterday, Danny told Checkpoint she was asked to leave the residence for health and safety reasons, and the hall initially kept the rent she had paid in advance. Well, today, Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford said Danny was not evicted. A care plan was put in place and the institution had to weigh up the rights of individuals against the collective good of the hall community and the potential impact on other students. Emma Hatton has more.
The student in question was not evicted and would never be, none of our students would be evicted from the hall. There was an individual care plan put together for the student, which we do in all of these cases as well. So we object to the term eviction, and we also object to any implication that we would be such an uncaring institution as to put someone on the street in this situation without assuring that there's a care plan in place for them.
Strong words today from Victoria University's Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford after 20-year-old student Danny claimed she had been asked to leave Cumberland House last October after attempting to take her own life. Mr Guilford says part of Danny's care plan involved a negotiation around where she would live afterwards.
And so that conversation occurs, and then there's an arrangement made for the individual's family to pick them up and provide that family supportive environment for those students for a period of time.
He says the students can return to the hall after a period of time. I asked Mr Guilford to clarify whether the strong suggestion for Danny to leave Cumberland House was indeed a suggestion or a direction.
We've had a small number of occasions over the years where we have had to insist that a student goes, but we would never do that in the sense of, here's your suitcase, you're evicted and you're on the street. The only way we do that is that we reach a negotiated agreement about where they're going to go and what that personal care plan will look like when they get to that place. We are firm about this. Just popping someone who's committed suicide back into a hospital room because they say they're going to be okay isn't good practice, isn't good care of that individual, isn't good care of the members of the halls.
Not an eviction in the formal sense, but a verbal suggestion to leave for some time, and if you refuse, the university insists you leave for your own health and safety and the safety of others. And now about that care plan. I asked Danny about this yesterday.
And did they offer or help you find any help for your suicide attempt?
No. I guess they just saw that my dad was there and thought, hey, that's a parent. The parent can deal with it. It's not our problem anymore.
But Mr Guilford maintains students are always given a care plan.
We work closely with the hospital, our health providers, our counselling service, and between the hospital and the university a care plan is developed. If the hospital has developed the care plan, then we normally respect the care plan that the hospital has developed.
So you saw that she had a care plan from the hospital and that was sufficient?
Again, I'm not prepared to talk any more about the individual case.
The university says it was concerned that it only had a few hours to respond to RNZ's questions yesterday. Student magazine Salient, who published Danny's story on Monday, says it first approached the university 2 weeks ago, giving Danny's account and asking for a response. But a spokesperson for the university's communications team said the questions RNZ had asked were different to the ones asked by Salient. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
At 8 minutes to 6, we can update you that we have been... Well, Chris Bishop has declined an interview with us, basically. He's made allegations in Parliament today about Winston Peters, saying that after the investigation into Wally Homaha was started, he contacted Wally Homaha to assure him that everything would be all right. Winston Peters flat out denies that and says his staff has checked all his phone records and there is no proof that any call was made along those lines, or any phone call was made at all, I think, to Wally Homaha. We've approached Chris Bishop for an interview. He says he's in interviews right through this duration of this program. So we still have an invitation open for Winston Peters to come on the program to talk. It's coming up to 7 minutes to 6. Pressure is mounting on the chairman of Australia's public broadcaster, the ABC, to stand down amid reports of political interference at the highest level. Fairfax newspapers is reporting today that Justin Milne wrote to the ABC's former managing director, Michelle Guthrie, who was just sacked the other day, telling her to sack senior journalist Emma Alberici, following complaints from the government about her work. So Ms Guthrie was then sacked on Monday. With more on all of this from the ABC, here's Thomas Oriti.
It's the latest chapter in a turbulent week for the national broadcaster. The front page of the Fairfax Press alleging political interference at the hands of the ABC's chairman, Justin Milne. And the journalist at the centre of it all says it's come as a surprise.
It's disappointing if it's true, obviously. You don't want your chairman to hold such a dim view of you and your journalism.
The reports focus on an email allegedly sent by Justin Milne to ousted managing director Michelle Guthrie. Fairfax says it's dated the 8th of May and it instructs Ms Guthrie to sack Emma Alberici, adding, they, the government, hate her. We need to save the ABC, not Emma. But Emma Alberici was quick to point out the email hasn't been verified.
I certainly didn't know about it before I saw it in the newspaper as you did, and I haven't had any personal conversations with anyone at board level or indeed Michelle Guthrie.
Emma Alberici was criticised by the government after an analysis piece she wrote earlier this year about the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's corporate tax cut policy. But the ABC's acting managing director, David Anderson, says he doesn't believe there's been any political interference.
I've read those claims today, I've seen the press, and all I can say is that I'm focused on the future, I'm focused on getting on with it really, and continuing to do the great things that we do.
The World Today couldn't reach Justin Milne, but he's provided this statement.
The job of the ABC board is to independently govern the corporation, protect its best interests, ensure that it's well funded and well managed, and that our content is of the highest standard. That is precisely what the board has done and will continue to do.
His statement doesn't directly address the allegation that he asked Michelle Guthrie to sack Emma Alberici. Meanwhile, the federal opposition is demanding a please explain from Justin Milne. Communications spokeswoman Michelle Rowland called the chairman this morning. She says the conversation was cordial but didn't last long.
I can say that Labor is not satisfied with the response. If these reports are true, it is an extraordinary situation in which the independence and integrity of the ABC, which is the most trusted news organisation in Australia, that risks having been compromised.
Her colleague, veteran Labor Senator Doug Cameron, is calling for Justin Milne to step down.
It's clear that the chairman, Milne, was operating on the say-so of the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. The chairman and the board have got a responsibility to act independently. I think it's quite clear that Milne has not done that, and I think he should go.
That's Australian Labor Senator Doug Cameron ending Thomas Oriti's report. And in another twist, one of journalist Emma Alberici's stories, which came in for government criticism at the time, involved the Australian company MYOB allegedly not paying tax. Now, Justin Milne, who's been asked to resign, is also the chairman of that company. Many people across the media in Australia today alleging and complaining, really, that there's a conflict of interest there. ABC staff further have just held a union meeting where they unanimously passed a motion for Mr Milne to resign, or step aside at least until an investigation can be carried out. It's, almost 3 minutes to 6. There's a little bit of feedback coming in. One is on Anusha Bradley's story from Hawke's Bay about the rental squeeze. Lynn's got in touch. She says, next May 2019, I will have waited 3 years for a home and I'm still living in my little van at Cozy M Park. There's nowhere else to go. Thanks for getting in touch, Lynn. Rhonda says, I'm a landlord in Auckland. I experience exactly the same situation as described in Anusha's report in Napier. Every time I advertise a flat, I get between 900 and 1,000 people looking at the Trade Me ad, and in a few days, hundreds of people contacting me wanting to come and see the flat. As we take tenants with pets, we get so many desperate people who say they will be made homeless as soon as they can't find a place for themselves and their furry friends. And there's a little bit of feedback on the teachers rejecting the pay offer from the Ministry of Education. Leslie says, I do relief teaching. I'm semi-retired. I've worked every day this month and some days had a choice of 3 jobs. There sure is an acute shortage. Thanks for getting in touch on that. Leslie, of course, you can always get in touch with us. 2101 is the text. You can email us or get in touch on Facebook or Twitter. A couple of minutes to 6. It seems Wellington isn't the only city to get a visit from a rare whale. There's been excitement near London after a beluga whale, it's a beluga whale, normally only seen high up in the Arctic, was spotted swimming near the mouth of the River Thames. It was first spotted by an ecologist who said it had been feeding around barges in the southern county of Kent. The BBC's Robert Hall went out to Gravesend for a look.
Thousands of miles from the Arctic, just 24 from the centre of London. When a birdwatcher on the salt marshes east of Gravesend caught a glimpse of a white shape just offshore, he couldn't believe his eyes. It was a beluga whale, lost and far further south than any previous British sighting. Within hours, the news had spread across social media, bringing whale spotters out onto the riverbanks for a glimpse of the visitor.
Almost as soon as I arrived, I saw a glimpse of it, but it has only been surfacing maybe once every 15-20 minutes.
Seen the beluga whale, which I've never seen, never ever imagined I would see in Britain, let alone virtually in London.
Patrols from the Port of London Authority have kept vessels clear and monitored the whale as it searched for food.
The advice from us is for the navigators particularly, to keep an extra eye out and keep their distance from the animal. It is still swimming very healthily.
The last time a whale swam into the Thames, a bottlenose whale, was back in 2006. It got into difficulties and rescuers couldn't save it. Tonight there are fears for the beluga. The experts on board the patrol boat told me that after feeding they had hoped it would leave these busy shipping channels and head back out to sea. But there are still sightings, and that clearly hasn't happened. It too may be at risk.
And it's just come out to 6. That was Robert Hall with that report. After 6, more on whether you have to drive 30 kilometres an hour if you're driving through Auckland City.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has denied that he rang the Deputy Police Commissioner after the inquiry into Wally Homaha's appointment was announced. The National MP, Chris Bishop, used parliamentary privilege this afternoon to allege that Mr Peters called Mr Homaha to assure him things would be okay. Mr Bishop did not say where his information came from, but said the call was deeply inappropriate. Mr Peters says his office has checked all his phone records and found there was no basis to the claim. He says he has had no reason to call Mr Homaha since the controversy. Mr Peters says any suggestion that New Zealand First Ministers are seeking to unduly influence the inquiry is baseless nonsense. Ticket prices on some Air New Zealand routes are about to be increased because of rising fuel prices. The corporate travel agent FCM has announced that the airline is pushing up prices on flexi fares and last-minute bookings by 4 to 8% on some routes from Friday. The airline's chief executive, Christopher Luxon, says it does not take price rises lightly, but the company is facing headwinds of rising fuel costs. At the airline's AGM in Christchurch today, Mr Luxon also said Central Otago can't use a band-aid solution to cope with increasing tourism demand, and it should consider whether a new regional airport is needed. He says demand is growing for flights into Central Otago, but Wanaka Airport would need extensive upgrades, and Queenstown is already stretched.
We can't have an Auckland situation where the infrastructure doesn't support the growth that's happening there. And so our challenge back to the community and to Auckland and Queenstown Airport was, is there actually time for us to have a bigger, bolder, braver conversation about creating a new Central Otago regional airport that could support Queenstown and Wanaka but from a different location?
Christopher Luxon of Air New Zealand. The Associate Education Minister, Tracy Martin, says she's surprised primary teachers and principals have rejected the Education Ministry's pay offer. The Educational Institute says its members have voted resoundingly to reject the offer of a 9.3% pay rise over 3 years, and they'll vote on possible industrial action next month. Ms Martin says it's a good offer.
I am slightly surprised. I mean, this offer is a larger offer than all 3 offers put together that were accepted by the NZEI under the previous government. So it's disappointing.
Tracy Martin says the government has been trying to improve the education system, but there's only so much it can do in a short time. The National Party leader says the American president is a divisive person, but he deserves respect. When Donald Trump addressed the UN General Assembly earlier today, there was laughter when he boasted that his administration had accomplished more than almost any other in US history. Asked what he thought of Mr Trump being laughed at, Mr Bridges says it's down to him being a polarising character.
He's certainly got a strong perspective. Some things he's doing I agree with actually. There's a bunch of other areas where, as I say, he is divisive. So that's what that's about. And I think what is also true, though, as President of the United States, he deserves some respect, and I certainly wouldn't have been laughing.
Simon Bridges says, for example, he agrees with aspects of Mr Trump's tax agenda, which he says is having a stimulating effect on the American economy. The High Court has ruled that it was not lawful for Ministry of Social Development staff members to use false names and signatures on legal documents. It was revealed last year that members of the Benefit Review Committee kept using the names despite having been told not to. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson explains.
The committee hears complaints from beneficiaries about their entitlements, and the High Court case arose after a beneficiary, named only as Ms L, challenged some of its decisions about her. The ministry sought to keep the names of the decision-makers secret, saying it wanted to protect its staff from threats and abuse. But in its decision today, the court says the practice of using fictitious names and signatures breached Ms L's right to natural justice. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
A panel of 5 international museum experts is to review how Te Papa looks after its natural history collections. A planned restructure has raised concerns about the collections. Te Papa's board chairperson, Evan Williams, says the specialists know a lot about the science of collections and conservation.
They're very, very expert. We've given them access to all of the relevant data and documents on our structure. They're able, of course, to video conference, email each other, and we're very happy with the process that's going on.
Evan Williams says staff will be told the results of the review over the next month or two. It's 5 minutes past 6. Sport, a revamped international calendar is appealing to the All Blacks. World Rugby are considering a shake-up by ditching the June and end-of-year tours and implementing an annual World League. French media has reported that World Rugby Vice-Chairman Augustin Pichot has pitched the idea to New Zealand, France and South Africa. New Zealand rugby administrators are yet to comment, but while not specifically backing Pichot's plan, the All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster admits he'd be happy to see change.
There's a lot of thought going into post-2020 or whatever it is, and I think it's great. I think it's good that World Rugby is, and people in World Rugby are tossing some ideas out there about how to reshape our international game. So, you know, everyone's got a clean slate after 2020, and I know from our perspective we're pretty keen to look at any different ideas out there.
Ian Foster. Manchester United have been dumped out of English football's League Cup on penalties by second-tier side Derby County after the third round tie ended 2-2 in normal time at Old Trafford. With no extra time in this season's competition, the contest went straight to spot kicks, with Derby winning 8-7. United weren't the only Premier League team to fall to lower league opposition, with all-white Chris Wood's Burnley going down 2-1 to third-tier Burton. However, holders Manchester City eased into the fourth round with a 3-0 victory at third-tier Oxford. That's the news.
America's dad behind bars.
Bill Cosby has been unmasked, and we have seen the real man as he is headed off to prison.
Laughs on the world stage.
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true.
A frosty reception down south.
It's been raining off and on through the night, bits of sleet and snow flurries. Yeah, no, it's bitterly cold out there. I wouldn't want to be a newborn lamb.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, digital decision-making versus human decision-making, how the Ministry of Social Development is using predictive modelling to help our most vulnerable. And after 10, former editor-in-chief of the Daily Telegraph, Max Hastings, on his epic retelling of the Vietnam War from all echelons and all sides. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon, after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, but the odd shower from afternoon. For the remainder of the North Island, long fine spells and a few showers. Nelson, Marlborough, Westland and Northern Fiordland, mainly fine, a few showers possible inland. Bulla, scattered showers becoming confined to inland areas tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, mainly fine, with a chance of a shower for Banks Peninsula and Dunedin. Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, occasional showers, but becoming confined to the coast by tomorrow night. And for the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail, easing tomorrow morning. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Auckland Transport is considering cutting the speed limit to 30 kilometres an hour on all central city roads to reduce the rise in deaths and injuries. Now, you might think if you've driven often through Auckland City that doesn't matter too much because you often can't go faster than that anyway with all the traffic. But they say most serious crashes in the CBD involve pedestrians and cyclists. And the council-controlled organisation says a lower speed limit would go a long way to addressing this. Our reporter Matthew Chinnison reports.
When New York City's speed limit was lowered to 25 miles an hour, equivalent to 40 kilometres here, there was a 28% reduction in all road deaths and a 48% drop in pedestrian deaths. Statistics like this have prompted Auckland Transport to investigate whether it's feasible to drop the limit in the city centre from 50 kilometres an hour on most streets to 30 kilometres an hour. AT's Executive General Manager for Service Delivery, Andrew Allen, says it would have a negligible impact on travel times.
We're talking in the order of 18 people a year, either being killed or seriously injured in our CBD. That's 1.5 people a month. And I, for one, would be very happy to pay the price of a 2 to 3 minute journey time impact.
Mr Allen says a blanket speed limit reduction for roads bordered by the northwestern and southern motorways is one of the options AT is looking at.
That may well be the outcome, that it's a blanket reduction, but we're actually doing the investigation now to ensure that what we do is evidence-based and warranted.
Also targeted for lower speed limits are accident black spots throughout the Auckland region, where 64 people died and 749 suffered serious injuries on the roads last year. Speeds on some rural roads may also be reduced from 100 to 80 kilometres an hour. According to AT, the number of road deaths and injuries in Auckland has increased by about triple the rate of the rest of New Zealand over the last 3 years. The Automobile Association's Barney Irvine says lowering speed limits on certain CBD roads makes sense, but perhaps not on major arterial routes.
At face value, 30k would seem to make sense on a lot of streets in the CBD, but on big multi-lane roads that connect with the motorway, like Hobson Street, Nelson Street, Simon Street, Fanshawe Street, do we want to reduce the speed limits on these roads, or instead look at improving the roads so that they can be driven safely at the current speed?
Transport planner Bevan Woodward says many Aucklanders are too scared to cycle or walk in the city because of the risks. He says lowering the speed limit would make these options far more attractive and may in fact reduce congestion by getting people out of their cars.
This is the great secret that hasn't been tapped into in New Zealand. We think, we've got congestion. We need to speed it up. We need to get things moving faster. We need bigger roads and we need to go faster, and that will sort out our congestion. And it's like, no, it won't, unfortunately, because you can't outbuild congestion.
Caroline Perry from the road safety organisation Brake wants to see 30km/h speed limits in all busy areas.
We need to see 30km/h limits more widely in communities and outside schools, particularly where we see a lot of people walking and cycling.
And the plan for a blanket 30km/h limit was welcomed by the people RNZ spoke to on the streets of Auckland.
I've got no objection to it. I drive through the CBD fairly regularly and can be a little bit hectic.
Do you worry it would slow your travel time?
Not with the current congestion rate, no way.
I think I'm pretty okay with it. Mostly we're going quite slowly anyway. There's a lot to look out for, and so I personally don't have a problem with going slower in the city.
Some people, they don't see the cars moving over there, so 30 is the speed limit from where people can actually get informed about that the vehicle is coming, so it's safe for them.
The Auckland Council's speed management program is expected to go out for consultation in November. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Matthew Tunis in tēnei.
At 6:12, we're going back to New York now, where the US President Donald Trump has delivered a scathing attack on what he called the ideology of globalism. This is the same time he elicited some of those unexpected laughs we heard a little bit before. It's all at the UN General Assembly, of course. Mr. Trump said America would always act in a spirit of patriotism. He also attacked the Iranian government, accusing it of instigating chaos, death and destruction. The BBC's North American editor John Sopel was one of those waiting and watching.
When roads are closed for you and red lights really aren't a thing, there's not much excuse for being half an hour late for a journey of less than a mile. But Donald Trump missed his speaking slot this morning and made himself even later by stopping to talk to reporters on his way in. But when he did get underway, he went on a bit of a victory lap with unexpected consequences.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
The audience just giggled. US presidents are occasionally reviled, sometimes adored, but they're rarely laughed at. Last year he threatened to destroy North Korea and taunted Little Rocket Man. What a difference 12 months makes.
The missiles and rockets are no longer flying in every direction. Nuclear testing has stopped. I would like to thank Chairman Kim for his courage and for the steps he has taken, though much work remains to be done.
But it wasn't all sweetness and light. This America First president rounded on OPEC, the International Criminal Court and the World Trade Organization. He justified his trade war against China and then set out a vision starkly at odds with the internationalist audience listening to him.
We reject the ideology of globalism and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
His principal target in the speech was Iran. He called on nations to isolate Tehran's rulers and support its people. Not quite a cry for regime change, but it's clear where he stands.
Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond.
And the Iranians met fire with fire.
Unlawful unilateral sanctions in themselves constitute a form of economic terrorism and a breach of the right to development.
The Iranians and Americans avoided each other over lunch, but as always, Donald Trump was the centre of attention, even if many found his message distinctly uncomfortable. And on immigration and to those refugees fleeing persecution, Donald Trump said, stay at home and make your own countries great again. That was heard in icy silence. And the only time his speech was interrupted was with laughter. You get the impression that the UN doesn't much like Donald Trump, and it's a sentiment that's probably reciprocated.
John Soper with that report from the UN in New York at 6:15. A Christchurch homeowner says she's received death threats after she posted concerns on social media about a landscape service. The woman says she was threatened after going public about a company called Four Seasons Tree Lopping Services, which had been going door to door leaving business cards and residents' letterboxes. However, the similarly named Four Seasons Tree Care Ototaki Limited says it's being inundated with phone calls and emails from unhappy residents, even though it had nothing to do with it. The company has accused Four Seasons Tree Lopping Services of ripping off its name and damaging its reputation. Dan Dalgety investigates.
A Christchurch woman who doesn't want to be named received death threats after putting up a post about Four Seasons Tree Lopping Services on Facebook on the 17th of September. She says two women visited her and her partner's property on a Sunday afternoon and tried to sell services on behalf of the company. The women were asked to leave the property as the couple weren't interested in what they were offering. The woman says she started receiving abusive messages after putting up a post and images of the women dressed in high-vis jackets from her security surveillance system.
A few people shared it, maybe like 10 or so people shared it, then it finally eventually got to them, and I got death threats saying they're going to come around to my house and chop my head off. I got called all the names under the sun, is what you can imagine.
The woman provided screenshots of the death threats to Checkpoint and says she has since filed a report with police.
I was panicking. I just pulled over the side of the road. I had just done my grocery shopping with my child, and I pulled over the side of the road. I was in between Hornby and Horsell, and I had to pull over, and I actually rang a family friend who is a police officer, and he told me that to ring 111 as they had told me that they were going to meet me at my house.
The two women, who said they were from Four Seasons Tree Lopping Services, left business cards in people's letterboxes. When we rang the number, Danny Scanlon, who says he has taken over the business from his uncle, confirmed he had a group of people who went door to door looking for work, but he said they were not out to cause trouble.
I did read her post on Facebook. She put something on Facebook and she said something not nice, which is that we haven't done anything. We just do our job, like doing door knocking and that. If the people say no, we just walk away. We don't like go around places and like rob people off.
Mr. Scanlon says he knew nothing about the death threats or if the women were responsible, but he said he had seen the original Facebook complaint and said he had spoken to police following concerns about door knocking from Christchurch residents. 6 months earlier, another woman, who doesn't want to be named, said she was approached by two men in similar circumstances, who said they were from an arborist company. She says there were some pretty clear signs they weren't professionals.
They wanted to look at our trees because we do have relatively big trees in
our property. At the time they had just a high vis on. They didn't have any, anything that made them look like they were arborists in their vehicle.
Meanwhile, Four Seasons Tree Care Ototahi Limited received multiple phone calls and emails from residents in Hallswell about the inappropriate behaviour. Director Megan Hancock's-Hammer says Four Seasons tree lopping services isn't the real deal.
My post on Facebook said that we had a strong team of qualified, passionate arborists in a business that we'd built up for 10 years, and that these guys were complete cowboys. Yeah, they will come in and they will butcher your trees, and they should not be using chainsaws.
Megan Hancock's-Hammer says they can't be trusted because they're not even qualified.
The arboricultural industry in Christchurch is pretty small. We're a tight-knit group, and we all attend arboricultural conferences. We just all know who each other are, and these guys are not part of that community, and it's just known within the industry that they are unqualified and unskilled.
Four Seasons tree lopping services owner Danny Scanlon says he is open to changing his name if required. In a statement, Constable Deborah Smalley says the police are aware of reports from Christchurch residents about people going door to door offering tree cutting services and impersonating established arborist companies. She says people should think twice when anyone comes to their door trying to sell them a product or service. Constable Smalley says a legitimate service provider or seller will generally have a contact phone number and, more often than not, a website or online presence. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Dan Dalgety tēnei.
It's 20 minutes past 6. A major exhibition celebrating the arts and culture of the Pacific has opened in Britain. The Oceania show at the Royal Academy of Arts in London also marks the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's first voyage to the Pacific on the Endeavour. Among the pieces on show is New Zealand artist Lisa Reihana's huge panorama In Pursuit of Venus. The exhibition was opened by the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, in her first solo royal engagement. The BBC's Will Gompetz was there.
We're used to a bit of a song and dance being made about an exhibition opening, but not quite on this scale. This is the Pacific Islanders' way to mark the first ever show of their art and culture at the Royal Academy in London. A special event that was made even more memorable with the arrival of the Duchess of Sussex for her first solo official engagement. She appeared particularly taken with this 18th century costume of the chief mourner from the islands of Tahiti. The exhibition covers around 600 years of oceanic artworks, from this centuries-old Maori carving to these photographic portraits of life casts taken in 2010.
It's actually these treasures from the past, as well as the contemporary works, that are building connections and understanding between Pacific Islanders and people in Britain and in Europe.
The exhibition tells many stories. Obviously, there's Captain Cook's Pacific expeditions in the late 18th century and their impact on the indigenous islanders, and on Europe, where many of these objects were brought back and displayed in museums, where they were seen and studied by leading modern artists. The show of such wealth of Pacific Island treasures, or tanga as they are known, held by European institutions, raises the question of ownership and whether any of these objects should be returned to the countries from which they came.
For Indigenous peoples all around the world, if they came back and were shared, they would actually accrue more knowledge, research from on the ground, and that these gifts would probably come back again too. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to repatriate these taonga.
For the Duchess of Sussex, the exhibition served as a useful introduction to the cultures of the Pacific region, where she is going on an official visit with Prince Harry next month.
And that was Will Gompetz from the Oceania exhibition in London at 22 minutes past 6. To finish the program, we're going to bring you up to date with the very latest with Mycoplasma bovis and the fight we'll get on top of things and reimburse farmers, particularly down in Ashburton. MPI, we can tell you, will hold a closed-door meeting tomorrow with farmers in Ashburton as frustrations there grow over delays in compensation for those impacted by M. bovis. Speaking from his farm, Mid-Canterbury Dairy Chairman Chris Ford told me while MPI's Response Director Jeff Gwynn will host the meeting, he hasn't visited enough and the patience of affected farmers is wearing thin.
The big thing is receiving that compensation in a timely manner. In a lot of cases, it's not really happening. it's quite a complicated process to go through with for compensation, and in some cases it's very simple, and things should happen pretty quickly.
So, has it been explained to you, Chris, why there's these delays?
Just from MPI's point of view, I suppose the complexity of it all, with just making sure that everything is, the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before compensation's paid. They have to understand that this isn't the kiwi fruit industry. Farmers need more than just one cheque a year. And they need to, they need to be paid. Monthly milk checks are also very, very hard to probably make. Sorry, I'm sorting animals.
No, go for it. Sounds like you've got your hands full there. We can hear the cows.
Yeah, that's right. No, look, it is quite complex how it works, but I would have thought that things would be getting faster now and being done quicker.
Yeah, we've been told by the ministry that they do need to improve, they do need to get quicker. What are you going to be talking about tomorrow? What do you plan to say in that closed-door meeting to MPI?
It's a matter of just making sure that they are, they need to change their aspect of thinking, and people are just as important as their education. Oh, now my wife's yelling. So there's that'll be the main aspect, is to just take note of the people and the welfare of the people.
I just wonder whether you get the feeling that the Minister, Damien O'Connor, has sent Jeff Gwynn from MPI down there to talk to you guys tomorrow.
Yep. It's probably a long time overdue, and we're very, very happy that Jeff Gwynn is coming down and to give us his time.
Let's get just a little bit more specific before we let you go, Chris, because you've mentioned this thing about people's wellbeing a few times. What are your concerns with people's wellbeing on the ground, and what more support could the government do?
At the moment, they're doing a lot with rural support, are doing a great job, and with the funding they've given rural support with people on the ground, that process is working better now that we have local people looking after local farmers. But just making sure that, like, it would have been nice. The big thing, it would have been nice if the minister or Jeff Gwynn came down, a couple of times since their last visit, and just went and saw some of the farmers that are feeling it, that do have the concerns.
You'd like to see them on the ground a little bit more often?
Yep. Yeah, I'm happy to show them around, take them to farmers to make their issues aware. We have a great, do have a great support on the ground at the moment with our Lord. He's MPI's representative on the ground dealing with individual farmers, and his predecessor also did a wonderful job. But we just want to make sure that that we have enough people out there, just in mid Canterbury, doing those roles.
Chris, Jeff Gwynn's coming to town tomorrow, so why don't you invite him out to a couple of the farms? And if you did, where would you take him? Don't give away anyone's name, of course, but give us an example of someone you would take him to see, and what would you tell him about that person and what they're going through?
Look, there's a couple of farmers that are just a bit frustrated with how things are gone. Feed purchases. The value of feed, because, farmers have lost money through haven't been able to graze stock. These are quite simple processes, and we just want them, just make them aware that this could have been fixed back in March.
You're saying they could have given compensation a bit earlier and been able to provide that assistance to farmers and perhaps cut out the bureaucracy, sort the receipts out later, but at least get in early compensating people who are out of pocket.
Yep, yeah, no, that was one option that that was brought up at the previous meeting. That hey, look, let's pay the farmers, upon receipt of full compensation. And if the farmers were paid within that 14-day period, it was up to the farmer to make sure that they had everything correct and the compensation was put honest, and then put it back on the farmer that if it wasn't, they were liable for any charges or if they tried to be fraudulent with their claims.
Chris, the ministry say they're slowly, but they're getting faster at compensation. What do you say?
Prove it. Show me.
Mid-Canterbury Dairy Chairman Chris Ford ending the program for this evening. We will find out what happens at that meeting with MPI in Ashburton tomorrow, and we will get back to you and bring you up to speed as well. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks again for all your feedback, of course. We're back tomorrow. Ka kite anō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Winston Peters says records show he did not phone Wally Homaha after the inquiry began into his appointment as Deputy Police Commissioner. Primary teachers have rejected the Education Ministry's latest pay offer, and the union says they'll vote on possible industrial action next month. A corporate travel agent says Air New Zealand fares will rise by up to 8% on some routes from Friday due to fuel price increases. And the High Court has ruled it was illegal for Ministry of Social Development staff on the Benefit Review Committee to give false names on legal documents. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Super Rugby in the Pacific.
The brand of rugby they play would be exciting and heartwarming and successful.
The countries want it, the players want it, but who will pay for it?
We have to produce $12 million, and we just don't have that kind of money.